Hello and welcome. My name is Birthe Piontek. I am greeting you from my studio in Vancouver, British Columbia. I am situated on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations, and I'm very grateful to live and learn and make work on this land. I'm also very grateful that I'm here today, that I was asked by Brock University to respond to a few questions and talk about my process, my work, the challenges I'm encountering. And I will do this by also sharing my screen and sharing some slides to illustrate some of my answers. So bear with me while I'm navigating back and forth between the video camera and my screen. Okay, so let's start right away. So as mentioned, my name is Birthe Piontek. I am originally from Germany and I did my MFA in photography and communication design. And I've been in Vancouver since 2005. I've worked as a freelance photographer, but always maintained my own art practice that is rooted in photography, but over the years has seen the incorporation of other media like collage, installation, and sculpture. And I'm the assistant professor of photography now at Carr University of Art and Design here in Vancouver. So the first question was, what comes first, ideas or process? And while I would definitely say that ideas come first, all my work is ideas driven and concept driven. Obviously, the ideas transform and change and are influenced by the process and informed by the process. So it's a bit of a ping pong conversation. One cannot exist without the other. And to illustrate that, I will show some slides that give you an overview of a pretty broad arc of my practice of the last 10 years, where the idea basically maintained the same, but over time was transformed also through process and took on different iterations and different ways of expression. So ideas and process. So a lot of my work revolves around identity, which is essentially a very complex idea of the idea of identity, because it is mostly invisible and is so multi-layered. And for me, the question is like, how can it be visualized and how is it represented? And essentially there is a desire to make something that is essentially invisible, visible. I'm also interested in what its connection is to memory and how it relates to our physical body, especially the female body and the expression of female identity, and how it is represented in our society. And if you think of identity and the expression of identity, and if you are a photographer, usually the first thing that comes to mind, or the way one can approach this complex topic, is by looking at the other and by taking portraits, by turning the camera onto the other and trying to understand who the other person is. And that's what I did in a project called The Idea of North, which I started about 12 years ago, and it took me a few years to complete. It was taken, or I worked on it during a residency in Dawson City in the Yukon. And it's based on me coming to this small community that if you've been to Dawson City, it's really far up north. It's close to the Arctic Circle. And it's basically me pointing the camera towards the inhabitants of Dawson City and asking them that question of who are you? And trying to capture what my camera gives me as an answer to that question. But I quickly realized that this is also full of flaws, that gesture, and that there will never be a faithful, truthful answer to this. And observing my own method of working was that I also found myself like working more like a movie director by, approaching these people and essentially turning them into a cast of my series, and projecting ideas onto them that I had about this place or what I wanted to tell about this place. So it left me with these questions of like, what am I really able to tell about a person's identity? And how much am I really able to look behind the surface and see the complexity of what we're made of, like our dreams and hopes and desires and fears. And so even though that project was essentially quite successful, it was published in a book, I was somehow also a bit frustrated, or I really wrestled with the whole genre of portraiture. And up to that point, I'd always called myself a portrait photographer. So that led me to a different way of inquiring into the portrait and into portraiture, and led me to a work called, a series called Mimesis. And I kind of knew that I couldn't express these really complex ideas in a traditional portrait, but I was still very much interested in traditional portraits, and this desire to look at ourselves and make us visible as if we need to confirm our existence, and also this desire to attempt and capture and freeze time. So essentially, now that I had this frustration with me taking portraits and really questioning like what I'm able to say in these portraits about the person, I was really questioning like the nature of a portrait, and what is a portrait, and what is its relationship to the depicted person. Is it a copy of this person, or is it its own original? So I was really looking for ways to visualize the complexity of these like invisible and tangible aspects of a person, and the complexity of a portrait. So you can see how this initial idea is still there, the initial idea of like looking into basically a person's essence, a person's being, a person's identity, and how to depict it. And now it's formed over time. It's shaped by the process, by me trying out different ways to inquire into that subject. And I'm also very much interested in the photograph as an object. So what happens in the series of mimesis is like I'm using these found photographs that I find on eBay or in thrift stores as material to cut into them and transform them. They're essentially little installations that are brought back into a photographic form by me then photographing them. So the idea of like the photograph as an object is especially interesting to me in its relationship, like the relationship between a photograph and a person, and its relationship to convey identity. But especially now, at a time where photographs are hardly ever get printed, and all these images we take never make it really into physical existence, because everything seems to exist in a digital space. I'm really interested in investigating the photograph as an object. And then so that led me to another series called Miss Solitude, where basically this interest in the photograph as an object is developed more alongside with my general interest in the function of objects. With Miss Solitude, I'm also working with found photographs. And I'm really interested in the expansion of the photograph into this 3 dimension of physical space. And so the original idea of the depiction of a person, also like known as a portrait, um, so it had to convey my interest in identity had over the years really developed and shifted into really working with the found material and trying to bring it into a three-dimensional sculptural installation based approach. And so these found photographs, I'm combining them and pairing them with found altered objects. So in this case, for example, the photograph you just saw of the floating woman is kind of paired with this um, life vest that's like embellished with beads and little pearls, and it's turned into this assemblage. So the so I'm showing basically the things themselves instead of showing still lifes or taking photographs of them. And all is like revolving around the idea of this construction of this Euro-American construction of feminine beauty, health, and allure embodied by fashion models and beauty queens, and the inhabitability that comes with this. So this kind of legacy of all those beauty queens and models and the way they represent and perform in front of the camera, and how has that image shaped the an idea of a female body and what a female what a woman and a female body has to be. So in this case, for example, to see that kind of idea of like what I mean between, you know, like this expansion in the physical space, I collected these 3 images of these women with the vintage masks, and they're printed on transparency paper and then brought onto that mirror so that you can see yourself, but you can also see these women with a mask. On to the next question. What pushes your practice and why do you make art? Well, I think art for sure for me, my photography, but also the other art forms that I've now included into my practice, they are a sort of language for me to express myself. And by doing that, also to understand myself a bit better, to understand what matters to me, how I relate to the world, how I engage with the world, how I can question the world that I live in. And yeah, and essentially it's very much about making meaning, adding meaning into my life. I find it deeply fulfilling to make art and to teach art as well. So yeah, what pushes me is just a curiosity of to understand more and to understand myself and to understand the world that I live in and respond to that. And obviously that's big because it's a big, broad statement. The world is big and complex, and I obviously can't tackle every aspect and solve every aspect of this. But the immediate things that I am obviously interested in, or that I think I'm encountering in a way that I want to learn more about them, and I just talked about that a little bit in my previous answer. The things, you know, like how we are in the world, how we express our identities, how that can be visualized. These are really essential questions for me that where a lot of my life revolves around that, and art and trying to answer them through art definitely yeah, gives my life meaning. So I will try again to visualize some of those aspects of my answer in some slides. So I'm going to share my screen again. So essentially, art is a tool for me. And to understand, as I said, to understand myself, but also the world around me. And so I want to talk about a few projects where that becomes quite clear, I think. So one is called Lying Still, which is a project that started out as a visual diary that accompanied me through daily life to process and express the things that were going on for me during that time. I had been diagnosed with a chronic illness, and it was me trying to make sense of that and understanding also what was happening in my body and the changes that I was experiencing in my body. So there was definitely already this idea of like taking a picture, or the act of taking a picture as a means to comprehend. And so I use my body in these images as a catalyst to express emotions. It's kind of coming a little bit from an interest in performance as well. And over time, this project grew into like a very extensive investigation of the self. I'm working with these still lifes in this series. So it's like the one part are the self-portraits, and then there are these objects that are acting kind of as stand-ins to express an internal landscape or an emotional state, and they're charged with emotion and meaning. And they are kind of like these metaphors or symbols that refer to dreams and fears and this internal landscape of our minds, or of my mind. And even though obviously visually very different, but there is an overlap into the inquiry of the complexity and the desire to make something visible that's essentially invisible. So that's kind of carried forward, or carries this project as well. And so all these scenes are taken in my home in a domestic setting. And over time, I realized that even though this was a very personal incident that sparked this project, it was essentially a universal topic that I was addressing, like the topic of change and all those fears and desires that come with it. So in order to make it a bit more universal and more accessible, and to kind of bring it outside of just my own body and my own body performing for the camera, I was again looking at found images and working with found images, and again thinking about how women are represented and how women are performing. And so I brought these images into this body of work and kind of recontextualized it and changed their meaning and interpretation. They were mostly images from the 50s and 60s, similar to the ones in Miss Solitude, depicting women as they were performing and modeling and presenting something for the camera. And by kind of bringing them into my project and into my pairing them with my body and those objects I was taking pictures of, I basically do this like bigger examination of the role of the camera in the construction of the female self that is shaped by constraints of gender, domesticity, and the failing physical body. So you can see how they kind of, there is this conversation between the found image and my images. There are certain themes that are picked up in my images and then like expanded on in the found images, or vice versa. And the same with the still lifes. So they're kind of like all these puzzle pieces that together kind of work to provide a picture for myself of like essentially kind of like this idea of like, who am I? what's going on for me? Who are you? What do we have in common? And what's this place we're living in, this kind of construct of that society that we're living in. So in this work, it's like the not only the understanding of my own psyche and my own body, but also the understanding how it relates to cultural and societal norms, and where they come from and how they relate to me and how they have shaped me. Um, and then the other project that I want to show in that regard of creating meaning and understanding the world is, and my own world, is a project that's called Abendlied. In English, it would translate to evening song. And it also is a project that started from a very personal place. It was published as a book last year by Nomic Book. It was selected as one of Time's best photo books of 2019. And it's essentially a reflection on the universal topic of family, memory, identity, heritage, and belonging. And it shows my immediate family in Germany, my parents, my sisters, my nephew, and my niece. And it was captured over 7 years, a period of 7 years in which my mother was diagnosed with dementia, and my parents sold the home that I grew up in, my childhood home. And the project aims to look at the elements that create a family. So not just the genes, but also the stories and secrets, as well as the objects that we surround ourselves with. And so I'm looking at these objects again as these things that have always been there and are handed down, and kind of make up the tangible and visible material that turns houses into homes. And again, in this series, they become like these poetic stand-ins for underlying emotions and something that is unspeakable in a way and invisible. But so unique to each family. We all have that. Like we all have these objects in our families that have a certain kind of meaning, and by utilizing them, I'm expressing something that is otherwise maybe invisible. So and ultimately, it's like this question of like, how are we shaped by the place we call home, and what happens to us when we lose that foundational base, and how does it continue to live inside of us? And yeah, so that's the aim of Abendlied was, yeah, to express these emotions around loss, but also, yeah, the idea of like an anchor and a sense of belonging, and how can that be um, maintained, even though the physical place or the physical objects are gone. And then those objects also represent or show and express these emotions that my family processed or encountered while losing my mother to dementia and while witnessing her disappearance. So these objects express that too. Yeah, so essentially, like making art and engaging with art gives me meaning, and it makes my life richer and more colorful, and essentially makes me feel I'm not only participating but really engaging with my life, which I think is a really wonderful thing if you're able to do that, and if you're able to say that about your life. I'm very grateful for that. So the next question was, how do I know if a project is finished? That's, yeah, that's not easy to answer. Usually my projects are quite long. They are a minimum usually of 2 years, and often they result in books. So the work that you saw, the idea of North, Abendlied, as well as Lying Still, they were all between 5 and 7 years, and they all resulted in a book publication. And then, yeah, for these long-term projects, sometimes I will work on them simultaneously with other shorter projects. Let's say, like with the Lying Still work, I was working on this while I was also working on mimesis, and mimesis is a much shorter work, and that didn't conclude in a book. But yeah, I usually work with a document that I would have in on my computer, where I put all my images into, and then like if I know that this is going to be a book at some point, and I start gathering my images there and start moving them around and see how they correspond, and how they work together. And I'll do the same thing with like small prints on either like in my studio, put this up on the wall, live with them essentially like for a really long time, let them kind of sink in, and always like move them around when I add to it. And at some point there is this moment where you just notice when you start repeating yourself, and you notice how certain things have already been said. And yeah, maybe by continuing, you might refine certain things, and you swap something out, and you're like, oh, I took another picture of this, and it's much better than an older one. That, you know, basically they say the same thing, but like the new one says it much better. But in general, like, yeah, there is a repetition, and there is a certain feeling of kind of when you kind of really start to become a bit tired of it, and you notice those repetitions, that I think then the time has come for a project to finish, or to be finished. And it's usually like, yeah, when I stop having ideas of what to do. And then there's obviously other ones where you already have like a implemented timeline to when you start. Like if it's a residency, for example, like the idea of North was a residency, and I was only able to come back one more time after I did the residency. So it's already restricted by that. The project Abendlied was always limited in the sense of like, it would come to an end, or limited by the end of the sale of my childhood home, but also by my mom's condition. Like if I knew in the moment, the moment she wouldn't been able to participate anymore, really, and not knowing what was going on, and not so that I wouldn't have her consent to include her in these images, I knew that this would be the moment where I would stop working on the project. And that was about 7 years, over the time of 7 years. I wanted to quickly share another project with you, which was done during a residency, where I kind of encountered other challenges around the idea of like, when do I know a project is finished? So when do I know a body of work is finished? And just wanted to quickly talk about the project, which is called I Want to Be with Those Who Know Secret Things, which was a very restricted time, done in a very limited time during a residency here in Vancouver at the Burrard Arts Foundation. And I had, for the first time, a studio space where I was really able to explore and try new mediums, especially sculpture, and especially make really messy work that I wasn't able to make before. And so it was like based on this continuation of my desire and interest to expand the photographs into the three-dimensional space. And it's the whole project is a correspondence of these large-scale photographs that I took with a large format camera of fabric, and those images allude or pointed to the body, and what the body reveals or conceals, and then they are paired with sculptures in the physical space, in the three-dimensional space. So you can see in this case here, these are body hoses. They're made out of a nylon material filled with sand, and then covered in epoxy resin, so they stand. So something was that was soft hardens and turns into something very rigid. There's a soft sculpture made out of rope, and I inquired into other materials like latex that you can see here, which is filled with rocks. And then there are these, there are mattresses, foam mattresses, and then turned into these bodies and figures, shapes, and also held by epoxy resin. So for this particular project, so everything's revolving around the idea of the body and what is revealed and concealed in or through a physical body. And it was really important to me to have that correspondence between the photographs and the objects. But to come back to the question of like, when do I know, you know, if a project is finished, this one was obviously overall determined by the length of the residency. But like, to me, working with these different materials are all of a sudden posed this new question of like, when do I know a sculpture is finished? When do I know a form is finished? What does a sculpture need to function in space? And when do I know how to stop working on that? So I just wanted to share you that that process. I'll share with you this process, as this is like a bit of a different iteration of the problem, but kind of the similar problem of like, when do you know something is done? And this was definitely a bigger challenge almost, because I had to figure out what this means in regards of these materials when something is finished. So on to the next question. Can you offer any advice to artists and students studying art today? And yeah, I don't know if I can offer a lot of advice, but I hope I can share a little bit of my process or how I'm tackling these days, and the challenges that arise these days. Obviously, you can't really, like, to me, it's really difficult to answer these questions and not think about the current situation of the global pandemic and the implications and challenges that this has brought on to us. And one of the biggest challenges and aspects of COVID is for sure the idea around uncertainty, that nothing is certain. And yeah, like, I mean, that's something that's kind of really, that comes with life. Everything in life is uncertain, and I think we try our best to kind of construct a world where you kind of feel like we are in control and we can predict things. And I think the global pandemic just really brought out, or just like gave proof and showed us really like how little we are in control and how uncertain everything is. And the funny thing is that this is so, to me, like so much a characteristic of being an artist, is having to wrestle with uncertainty, because that's basically the essential part of being an artist, is navigating uncertainty. So in many ways, I feel like we should be equipped in you know, approaching this challenge. But yeah, so I think what this means is, like, when you're an artist, you can't really plan for things. You can't be like, you don't create like these like really tangible stepping stones in your career where you're like, if I do this, this will for sure lead me here. If I get this degree, it will open the door for this thing. That just is the funny thing about art and studying art and getting an art degree, is like that there is this, it's not predictable in so many ways. The outcome is not predictable. So as an artist, you kind of need to learn to really embrace that uncertainty and learn to live with this, and also obviously learn to mitigate it where possible. So to me, like, in many ways, that means like you need to be resourceful and you need to be really open-minded, trying to understand yourself, your art, your strengths and your weaknesses without navel gazing, like without kind of thinking about yourself the whole time and being very anxious. Like looking into the world and looking at other art and understanding how other artists perceiving the world and reading this, um, uh, and responding to this. And then the other thing is like that art and being an artist can be very lonely, especially right after leaving school. You're so used to this community, and then all of a sudden this community is gone. So to create a network of like-minded peers that not only yeah, like help you feel less lonely, but also really help you in very tangible ways of helping to navigate really concrete problems of how do I ship my work, how do I create it, do you know a good framer, all these things. And you do this by also being willing to help. So you need help, but you, in order to get that, like you also need to be willing to give it, right? So you need to find allies, and you need to foster connection. I'm part of the Cake Collective, which is essentially a photo collective, which was founded in Europe and now has these two branches, one in Europe and one in North America. And really we're helping each other by being like being a team in a way, even though we're obviously all like having our own lives and wrestling with our own problems, but really supporting each other, not only through like photographic or art related issues, but also yeah, they go, like our conversations go way beyond that. So in short, yeah, being resourceful, being adaptable, looking at yourself, trying to understand what you're good at, what are your, what is there that you can contribute, where do you need help, and yeah, trying to become this kind of team player, even though you are essentially alone in that journey of being an artist. I think those would be my answers for this question, and I hope that makes sense, and I hope that helps a little. Okay, so on to the next and last question. Can you reflect on your experience as an artist during COVID? Yeah, I can. As mentioned, COVID really heightened the sense of uncertainty and brought to the forefront how little control we have over our lives. And like everybody, like I still feel very disoriented and also have a lot of anxiety around this topic, and still coming to terms with this and navigating it on a daily basis. As an artist and as a teacher, as an artist, the implications that it has brought on in terms of certain projects that I can pursue or not pursue that were placed on hold. As a teacher, adapting to an online learning environment, how can I be there for my students in really meaningful ways, even though I'm not getting to, like most of my classes I taught online, so I'm not, even if I'm not sharing the same space with them, how can I support them? Definitely feeling a disconnect to my family in Germany. I'm not able to travel, feeling a disconnect with my friends, you know, like all these things, like they're definitely happening for me as well. And so the interesting things, and that I wanted to share with you in my last slides is work that came out of COVID. And not only I started it before COVID, but like I really finished it and really kind of engaged with it during COVID. So the times of COVID. So Janus is another iteration of kind of ongoing inquiry into the topics of memory and change, and the idea of what kind of impact that has on our identity, and obviously all those topics are really coming to the forefront during COVID, and the idea of change, of uncertainty, of the body being confined to a space. And so all these photographs that you see are in the series were taken in the same corner of my studio, as I'm even before COVID was really interested in how an artist can find inspiration in the limitations of a specific space. And obviously during COVID, it's that space that I'm restricted to, and where I spend the most time in. And so I'm trying to utilize the change in light. I'm working with objects that are like fruits, vegetables, and flowers that are commonly associated with the traditional still life genre, and allude to change, because they all are subject to change and to transformation, to growth and decay, similar to our bodies. And so I'm really interested in this idea of kinship between body and object. And so I'm using my body in these images together with these still lifes, again, to depict this idea of a likeness of organic matter that is exposed to the forces of change, and how we all adapt and and mutate and grow and decline every day, even if this transformation is mostly invisible to the eye. And so in the series, so obviously it's the series, and the idea behind these images goes beyond COVID, but it definitely is a response to COVID, and it is, and many of these ideas were really enhanced and brought out by me experiencing COVID. And for example, the image on the left with a feed on the parsnips, like responding to the idea of uncertainty, and trying to balance, and not knowing how to move forward. So all these ideas and emotions were kind of like channeled in the series Janus. So this concludes my interview, artist talk. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a little bit out of it. If you have any questions, if you want to see more, I'm going to share my website, and then on my website you also find the email if you want to reach out if you have any more questions. I hope this finds you all well. I hope you have a good fall full of creativity and meaningful ways to respond to our current times, and also to the uncertainties and anxieties and challenges that we're facing. I'm wishing you all the best. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for having me, Brock University. And until next time, all the best. Bye-bye.